Welcome along. I'm James Ollie and I've got Mark Ogden and Rob Dawson here with me in the studio. I'm reminded of a clip from Blackadder, which is a cult BBC comedy from the 90s, for anyone unaware of where he talks to his servant and he says, well, you've done a really great job there. You've deserved a short holiday. Did you enjoy it? And that's it. That's how I feel about where we are in this season. But you have actually had a break, haven't you, Rob?
I have a little bit of a break, but I'm about ready to go and flying out to the States to cover City. You're going as well with Chelsea. The only one that's having a little bit of a break is Mark.
Oh, he's just swanning in for the final, isn't he?
You're having the advanced party, yeah, and I'm just going to watch from afar and just see how it takes off in Europe, see what the vibe is like on, watching from pubs, from Box Park. I think it's important to assess how it's taken up. But listen, all joking aside, I do think that I think a lot of us have been quite negative about the Club World Cup because of how it's been arranged and which teams have qualified. But certainly from a European perspective, a lot of these games will be played at kind of prime time, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock slots. And I think they will actually catch on. People want to watch football at the end of the day. And I think even though a lot of teams aren't in it, I think in terms of the football public will want to watch it. So it might be a surprise hit.
Well, on Saturday evening, it all starts in Miami with one Lionel Messi and his Inter Miami side taking on Egypt's Al Ahly. What are we expecting then, guys, going into the tournament? Mark, you mentioned the sort of lukewarm reception it's got in Europe. Do you think once it's underway, it will gather momentum and it will start picking up traction?
Yeah, look, it's going to be different from an international World Cup because let's be honest, if an international World Cup is around, the whole country gets behind it and wants to watch their team play. And it's, from a UK perspective, Chelsea, Man City aren't universally popular in the UK, so it's different. But I do think it'll catch the attention of fans because they want to watch the big teams play. I'm sure people want to watch PSG play after being so fantastic in the Champions League final. From my perspective, I'm looking forward to watching the teams that, from South America that will have, the stars of the future maybe that we know a lot of South American kids now come over at 16, 17 to play for European teams, but there may be some real gems over there that are about to be discovered. So I think it will have something, but I think the negativity is obviously around the fact that, well, I think a lot of it's been fueled by Gianni Infantino, hasn't it? The fact that he's basically made this his little project, and the way that Inter Miami were kind of crowbarred into the tournament, how the Club World Cup trophy seems to spend its life in the Oval Office. It's just all a bit weird, but I think once the football starts, all the off-field nonsense might subside a little bit, as it does in the club in the men's World Cup, or the Qatar was the same, wasn't it? Once the football starts, people tend to forget about the negativity.
Yeah, but that was a World Cup. This is a Club World Cup, an expanded tournament that I am finding it difficult to suspend my cynicism about it. I have to say, because it's all so artificial. And I know you can say, well, every tournament is artificial to the point that then it creates its own history. But they've had to create a transfer window for this. They've shoehorned teams in. They're still trying to get Cristiano Ronaldo in there somehow. They're struggling to push the tickets. As you say, the trophy's been sat in the Oval Office. Pretty gaudy, the whole affair, that whole show with Infantino and Donald Trump. Rob, do you share my cynicism, or am I focusing on the wrong things here? It just feels as though the clubs have been, had a lot of cash thrown at them and regulations written where you've got to pick your best team and you've got to come and there'll be loads of money and all of this. I'm struggling to see the sort of the football purity in the middle of all this.
I think with any new tournament, it's the unknown, isn't it, that creates scepticism, and I don't think it helps when, and we're going to talk later on in the podcast about whether teams are taking this seriously or not. I don't think that helps. There's never these questions before a World Cup, is there? Are England going to take a World Cup seriously? Obviously. I don't think it helps when fans are kind of faced with these questions about whether the big European teams, in particular, are going to take it seriously. I tend to agree with Mark, though. I think that eventually football fandom will take over, and that maybe there won't be an awful lot of fans tuning in for, I don't know, Porto versus Palmeiras. Obviously not in Europe, but when it gets to the latter rounds of this, if this goes the way that we all think it does, the UEFA teams are going to be the strongest, and you end up having PSG against Real Madrid in the quarters, or City versus Bayern Munich in the semi-final. That will draw people to watch. Maybe not in the stadium, because I think that's a different issue. That's about kind of captivating the American public into watching football matches on the ground. I think in terms of TV audience, I think people will tune into that, particularly if the games are at the right times, which they are because of the staggered kickoff times. I think ultimately fans want to watch football, and this essentially is going to be the world's best teams competing against each other, and I think people will watch that.
I think the issue for me though is it's the players are worn out. I mean, certainly the players that play at the big teams in Europe, they're playing too much football, and this is coming at a time where it's supposed to be the rest period. It's supposed to be the rest period in between major tournament years. There's no Euros or Copa America this summer. There's no World Cup. So this is generally the summer that players get a rest. So we know that a lot of players, I mean, you look at the Man City players, how they really struggled to get the season completed. And I just feel for them a little bit. And I think the fans, there's a fan fatigue as well. But once it gets going, I'm sure it'll be of interest. But the issue for me, the defining image of this tournament for me is Gianni Infantino like some weird uncle with his thumbs up all the time and showing off his trophy and welcoming Lionel Messi. It's just a bit wrong. And I think it's been borne out. It's almost like a spiteful competition to hit back at UEFA. UEFA have the Champions League. That's the biggest, most glamorous club competition in the world. It makes loads of money for UEFA, and FIFA want a slice of that pie. And it just feels like it's been done for financial reasons rather than football reasons. And that's what I don't like about it. It's just, it feels like the Infantino tournament rather than the FIFA tournament. And I'm not saying that in a positive way.
It could die on its feet. I think that's the danger for any new, not that this is a new tournament or this is an expanded version of the tournament. There is a danger that there could just be fatigue around the whole thing, that the players don't care, the managers don't care, fans switch off and think, I'm just gonna wait till the Premier League starts or the European League starts. I don't really care whether my team wins or loses. On the flip side of that, I think that it could go the opposite way. And maybe this is obviously the first go at this. In 4 years' time, or maybe 8 years' time, when we're into the second and third go at this, that we may look at this conversation and go, I can't ever believe that we thought that this wasn't going to take off, because look how big it is and look how great it is.
That's very possible, but we should also remember that the players tried to come together to launch legal action against FIFA over the match calendar. And all right, this was only part of it. There was obviously the expanded Champions League was another element in terms of cramming more games into the schedule. But the players themselves, as much as they've been able to so far, it's not like en masse they've all decided to go on strike or boycott the tournament or got anywhere near that stage. But there were enough high-profile names, I thought, that came out to say that, look, enough is enough and something has to be done, and they got nowhere. So we as much as we can talk about, once the games kick off and let's see the big teams play the big teams, a lot of these players are exhausted.
Look at Kevin De Bruyne. Obviously, his contract was ending this summer at City, and he made it clear straight away, I don't want to extend my contract for 2 weeks and go to the Club World Cup. It's the last thing I want to do. So he's actually finished his season, he's having a rest, will probably sign for Napoli soon. Doesn't want to go to the Club World Cup. He could have done, because nobody's interested. It's not the International World Cup. Everybody would want to be there. This, it's almost like everyone's looking for an excuse. Phil Foden was pretty clear that he's had a really tough season, doesn't want to be there, but he's going. So if the players aren't interested, that for me is a concern.
And the games are going to be, I'd be surprised if there's much pace in some of these games. If you think about the temperatures that they're going to be played at, on top of the load into the legs that we're talking about. I know we're going to talk to Tim later about the Brazilian teams, but you do sort of think with those players being in the middle of their season, they're going to be completely conditioned in a much better place physically to go and attack this tournament.
Well, that's why, and I think that you can't really draw. I mean, I've made obviously a big conclusion about a couple of minutes ago, saying that we expect the UEFA teams to be the strongest teams in the competition. In terms of talent and investment in those squads, they should be, the quarter-finalists and the semi-finalists. But, the history of this competition, I've just got the numbers here. Tournament's been won by Europe, or the UEFA team 16 of the last 17 years. But all of those games were hosted in season when the players were already fit. There is a danger, I suppose, that all these teams, and PSG is a great example. They've exerted all that energy to win the Champions League. They turn up at the Club World Cup already completely out of energy, and they die on their feet a little bit in these games because of the heat, because of the intensity, because they've had no rest at all, and they get knocked out in the group stages.
The issue for me, sorry James, is that it's the Club World Cup, and the champions of England, Liverpool, the champions of Spain, Barcelona, Italy, Napoli, Argentina, Vélez Sarsfield, Portugal Sporting Lisbon, USA LA Galaxy, all of the domestic champions, and none are at the Club World Cup. Now, I know you could argue that how can you have those teams in it, but they are the best teams in the world right now. Certainly Liverpool, Barcelona, and Napoli are. Lamine Yamal, the best player in the world right now, isn't going to be there. So I think, again, with an international World Cup, the best players are there, the best teams are there. This just seems a bit weird that Chelsea are in it because they won the Champions League 4 years ago.
I can only assume that they will look to tweak that as time goes on. You're talking about, the second or third iteration of this expanded tournament. They'll learn from their mistakes. I understand the logic of it in terms of you need to plan. You can't just drop a tournament on a club, with 3 weeks or a month's notice. But by the same token, the 4-year cycle, it does feel too long in terms of a qualification process. I wonder whether they'll weight that maybe a bit differently going forward.
Well, there's nothing to suggest that in, 10 years' time that we're not having a break in domestic European leagues for this. They're taking a break in Brazil for this tournament. And I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen anytime soon. But 20 years ago, could you ever imagine the Premier League stopping for an international World Cup?
For a FIFA event.
For a FIFA event. So there's nothing to say that eventually...
To be fair, what was it, 2 years ago now, maybe Arsene Wenger was given that task of looking at the football calendar. And he came back and he made the valid point that the calendar that we operate on now has been in place since 1930, pretty much, Seasons were played, summer for major tournaments. And in the modern world, it doesn't really fit, does it? But it's how you get FIFA, UEFA, the clubs, all these different kind of stakeholders together to agree on a calendar going forward. But it needs to happen because it is overheating. It is ridiculous that you've got a free summer and it's been taken up by a month-long tournament. Because, what are Chelsea, Man City, Real Madrid going to do next season? Because their season starts now. There's a World Cup at the end of the season. What sort of shape are the players going to be in for the actual International World Cup, which is going to be a 6-week tournament? It's got 48 teams. And I was in Munich last week at a FIFA Pro event, and their point is that the reason they're taking action against FIFA is that FIFA are supposed to be the guardians of the game, the kind of the administrator, so they shouldn't be allowed to, also influence the calendar. They can't have their own competitions in a calendar that they control. It's a conflict of interest. Because it is FIFA that are actually adding tournaments. You mentioned before about the Champions League being expanded. The Premier League hasn't expanded, in 25 years? The Premier League is what it has always been. The Champions League has grown a bit, but those tournaments are already there. It's FIFA that is adding tournaments, like the Club World Cup, to the calendar, and the calendar can't cope.
What do we want to see from this tournament? Do you think that it makes it for a better tournament if all the big European teams do really well and get to the last 16 quarter-final? Or would you like to see some of the more unknown teams to the European audience get really far and have one possibly win it? What makes for a better tournament, do you think?
I mean, it depends what the goal of the competition is. I mean, if we're talking about trying to grow football in the US, then you probably need those big teams to be competing at the business end. But I don't think that is the goal here. It's difficult to see the goal being anything other than money. And to be honest, if FIFA want to generate the most cash, then they need the biggest teams to go the furthest.
But the money follows intrigue, doesn't it? There's only intrigue in the tournament if people are tuning in to watch something that the result isn't already written. And it's all very well having the money available for this one, but presumably the goal is to have this every 4 years and to have it grow and grow and grow. And so
I just don't see how it's sustainable in this current format, in the sense that it comes in a free window. In a free summer, I don't see how it works. I mean, one solution could be, and I don't think it'll ever happen, is that if you want to play in the Club World Cup, the money is so big, then you do it over a season like the Champions League, and you opt out of the Champions League that season. So if Real Madrid and Man City are in it, they play that season of the Club World Cup and step out of the Champions League. But that won't happen because UEFA won't have that.
The thing is, there was also a middle ground here. I mean, there was a tournament that lasted a week with 4 teams in it. I went and did it in Abu Dhabi when Chelsea won it, and it was a bit strange, but it kind of worked, and you weren't really there long enough to sort of be that concerned about the wider
champions of each continent, don't you?
Issue of it. Yeah. And what we've gone from is a very small, compact tournament to a really bloated version where you'd actually think there's a middle step there where, say, it had gone to, even if it had gone to 16 teams, you could say, well, all right, 16 teams, you could try and play it in, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, condense it down a little bit more and try that. But to go straight to 32 teams, it's almost presuming that there's an audience for that rather than proving that there is one by building on a stepping stone from where it was for 1 week to go for, say, two and a half
It's always
weeks.
a solution, though, isn't it, for football authorities, that a bigger tournament is a better tournament. And you saw what happened with the Euros. I mean, lots of people would have preferred to have the Euros stay as it was, as what was it, 16 teams, have really kind of condensed tournament, fewer games, but higher quality. And it's just turned into a basically European version of the World Cup. And that's exactly why they've gone with this straight out the gate.
I mean, we know that ticket sales aren't particularly great, and in an international World Cup, you can always rely on, a community of, maybe if Cameroon at the World Cup, there'll be a Cameroonian community in the US that will all come together to watch the games in wherever. If it's Kansas City or Seattle, they will go there. But I don't know how you're going to fill a ground with fans from Mamelodi Sundowns versus Ulsan. I just don't know how it works. I mean, Wydad versus Al Ain. What sort of Moroccan and UAE communities in the US to fill a ground? And we know that ticket sales are struggling. I don't see neutrals buying tickets for these games. They want to watch Inter Miami, they want to watch Real Madrid, they want to watch PSG.
There's tickets available for the opening game.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's important to say
that's
that
in Miami, and that's Messi.
And that's Messi in Miami.
That we are all based in England, and we have got quite a strong European bias, and the feeling in Europe is of a little bit of kind of, I don't know, shrugging your shoulders a little bit. But there has been a massive response to this tournament elsewhere in the world.
I mean, if this was being held in Brazil or Argentina, if it was held, if the game's in Buenos Aires and Rosario, I'd imagine the grounds would be full. It'd be exciting, but because it's in the US, that doesn't help either, because there's not a domestic club scene in the US that isn't yet big enough and mature enough to actually embrace it.
Well, and also, we have to mention the political environment in the US at the moment is not really conducive to people coming, to sort of watch and travel and be a tourist in the country. Then you think the ticket prices are extremely expensive. And I know there's a dynamic pricing thing in play here, which I think FIFA have now dropped the prices for that opening game in particular dramatically from where they were. I think they're about a fifth of what they were when they first went on sale. But the whole environment, and then I'm sure we're going to speak to Lizzie later on. I mean, about what the perception is in the US of how seriously some of the big teams are coming over to take this tournament. And if there is any doubt about that, you throw that into the mix as well. This tournament's got an awful lot of negativity and sort of doubt to overcome to prove itself anything like a success.
It's like every time we travel to the US for and I know this isn't a pre-season tour, but every time we travel to the US for pre-season, the American public do seem quite underwhelmed by the squads and the teams at these big European sides.
There's definitely soccer fatigue at that level, because I remember going to the States back in 2010, that back 15 years ago with Man United, and the crowds are huge because it was a rarity. But now every summer there seems to be a tournament in the US. We've got the Premier League tournament is in the US this summer. I think there's a danger of kind of saturating the market in the US before the biggest tournament of all, the Men's World Cup next year. That you just wonder whether it would have been a better idea for FIFA to take it to Brazil or to Japan or to Mexico this year or to Argentina, traditional football hotbeds. That would have given this tournament a bit of lift in its first tournament. I think the US, it's such a competitive market. Again, it's the NBA finals. It's, the big thing right now is the basketball.
And massive stadiums as well. It's 80,000, not 30,000 seat stadiums.
It's going to be tough. It's a tough sell in the US.
I mean, the only benefit, I suppose, is the logistical advantage that it gives you to try and iron out the problems before, a year out from a World Cup. But yeah, you're right. I mean, from a standalone marketing perspective, it does feel as though it was the wrong call to probably take it there.
I mean, I think in fairness, if you were looking at European fans or even South American fans travelling to a different country to watch your team, I mean, the travel ban aside, if you're going to go to a tournament, you would want to go to a tournament in the United States as opposed to, say, Saudi, or, would you get Chelsea fans travelling to Brazil to watch their team? I think it's more likely that they would travel to, have 2 weeks in Philadelphia in the summer to try and if you were looking to build an outside audience, as in travelling fans, which obviously FIFA would quite like, but it doesn't sound like the American government are particularly keen on, that America is the place to have that, because in theory, it is a place where you would go anyway.
Surprised they didn't get Wrexham in somehow.
Do we know that, have they announced the host for the next tournament, the 2029 one? I know
Not sure.
I know Australia's been mentioned but again, we're talking about a place that Australia, be a great sporting venue, but it's not easy for fans to get to, is it?
No.
So, I mean, I think this has been, the proposal was to make this like the Confederations Cup, the kind of the pre-World Cup kind of host, but it needs a lot of work, a lot of thinking out. But I'm not sure it's got the greatest future, to be honest.
I think it's going to take off. That's my hot take. There you go. You can clip it when it dies on its feet.
Well, today marks 1 year to go until the World Cup starts in the US, Canada, and Mexico. Not only is the US hosting this 32-team Club World Cup tournament, they're also hosting the CONCACAF Gold Cup, a 16-team international tournament. How good a test will this combination be over the next 12 months? Lizzie Bescherano joins us. Welcome, Lizzie. As spokeswoman for the whole of the United States, can you tell us, is the country ready for the next year?
I don't think so, unfortunately. It'll be very interesting to tell in various cities how they approach the influx of fans, the managing of logistics, the travel. Unlike we've seen with previous FIFA tournaments, public transportation in major US cities is a huge problem. I am based out of Miami, so I can speak mostly about Hard Rock in Miami Gardens, not Miami Gardens. And there are no trains. I believe FIFA is going to be doing some sort of bus system, but that's still to be determined. And the access, for example, the main road into Hard Rock is I-95. There's still massive construction on it. The other day, coming back from an Inter Miami game, I-95 was shut down entirely. So it'll be interesting to know that in about 1 week, when the tournament kicks off at Hard Rock, how that's going to be dealt with. Obviously, there are changes to be made ahead of the actual World Cup coming in 2026, but it seems like slow progress across the United States. And so it'll be very interesting to tell how quickly each city manages to complete each project, because as of right now, there's a lot of concern.
You mentioned then the influx of fans. Are we actually expecting a lot of fans to travel to this Club World Cup? I mean, obviously the World Cup in 12 months' time, that will be a different scale. But from what you're hearing, do you think there will be a lot of fans coming from outside the US to go to these games? Because from our perspective in Europe, it's not really caught fire. So I'd be surprised if there's going to be a lot of fans, maybe a lot of South Americans maybe. But is it really going to be a situation where there's going to be lots of fans arriving for this tournament?
Not to the scale of the World Cup, of course. I think there are some teams in the Club World Cup that draw fans. I would signal mostly the Brazilian teams and Boca and River, whose fans are so loyal that no matter the tournament, they're willing to travel. So I think Miami can expect an influx of Argentinian fans. Orlando and Atlanta can expect an influx of Brazilian fans. But as of right now, it hasn't been as exciting, I would say, like in the States. There's a lot of concern that these teams are treating this tournament as a preseason friendly or series of friendlies. So without rosters announced, without really knowing whether the stars will be making it out to the United States, fans are concerned and not willing to pay the $250 per game as of right now. That being said, if Real Madrid announces their roster and every star comes out to play, Chelsea, every star, Bayern Munich, etc., then I believe there will be more traction, but it will be North America centric, I would say. I don't expect a lot of European fans to travel, but you guys can attest to that better than I can.
Normally in the build up to a tournament, particularly a week out or a few days out from the first game, there's normally sort of blanket media coverage domestically and pushing ticket sales, marketing, merchandising, advertising. What is it like in the US at the moment? Are there a lot of, do you feel there's a tournament kicking off in a few days?
Yes and no. There are billboards everywhere, but I will say it's a little difficult for teams to promote the Club World Cup, given that seasons have just ended on behalf of the European teams and Liga MX teams, whereas MLS, as of last Saturday and last Wednesday, there was still league games going on. And so, for example, when we would ask Inter Miami head coach Javier Mascherano, what are you looking forward to at the Club World Cup? He would stop us immediately and say, hey, listen, we're first focused on the Wednesday game against Montreal or the Saturday game against the Columbus Crew. He wouldn't even consider that. So it's just now 2 weeks out or 10 days out that Inter Miami can now begin speaking about it to the media, to fans, or the team will put out communications and tweets saying, hey, now we're locked in for this new campaign and new tournament. I think given the awkward timing of it all and the saturated calendar, it's been difficult for fans to understand now is the start of a new summer international tournament.
Is it also an issue the fact it's the NBA finals this week? So, I mean, that is a massive deal in the US, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, the competition for attention, I think, has always been there for soccer in the United States. But right now, I think more than ever.
Lizzie, obviously FIFA have bent over backwards to make sure that Lionel Messi is there and Inter Miami. You've got Seattle Sounders as well and LAFC who've kind of taken advantage of a bit of a backdoor route into the tournament. How do you think the MLS teams are going to get on in this tournament? Is there a chance that any one of these is going to get to the latter rounds, or is it about sort of getting out the groups as best you can?
I think the expectation first and foremost is to get out of the group. I think each team knows it'll be a difficult challenge. Again, I speak to Inter Miami and Mascherano and what he said because that tends to be my day-to-day, but even he, with the roster that they have, with Messi, with Suarez, Busquets, potentially Jordi Alba, depending on his injury, even he is tempering expectations by saying our goal is to make it out of the group, but don't underestimate Al-Ahly, don't underestimate Palmeiras. Like, I think for everyone in CONCACAF, including Liga MX teams, the challenge will be to make it out of the group stage. And it's interesting, but even Jorge Mas, co-owner of Inter Miami, who is, I want to say, one of the biggest dreamers in all of Major League Soccer, who said from day one that he would sign Lionel Messi, is saying that the dream is to get out of the group. And I think that says more about the expectations than what fans can assume or what we as media can assume.
I want to ask you about the pitches because when I've travelled with Premier League teams to the US for pre-season, I know it's a different sort of situation there because obviously the pitches aren't sort of necessarily curated as they're going to be for this tournament. But there is always a bit of criticism privately, certainly, about the state of the pitches in America. The Copa America pitches weren't great either. What can you tell us about the surfaces that the teams are going to play on and what they're doing to try and improve them?
FIFA's adopting a completely separate system from what CONMEBOL did at Copa America. So last summer, we saw the stitching aspect and fields being placed together just days before kickoff, and the seams were seen. Aesthetically, obviously, was a mess, but many players complained that between the seams, they could get injured and that it was very uneven and bouncy, and that caused for several concerns. This year, however, FIFA's adopting a new style. One, for example, they're applying a field for the entirety of the tournament. So CONMEBOL in most stadiums, particularly NFL stadiums that used artificial turf, they would switch out the field. Even during the tournament, obviously we saw there was a switch ahead of the semifinals, a switch ahead of the final. FIFA is going to be using one strand of grass for the entire tournament. They're calling it a shallow pitch, which is strips of artificial and natural grass kind of welded together and then hydraulically placed together on the field. So it's a different system entirely. They're also creating drainage systems so that stadiums like Mercedes-Benz at Atlanta, who receives little to no light, has a drainage system, has sunlight, and can be kept relatively well throughout the 3 or 4 weeks that lasts for the entire tournament. So the treatment will be very different. That's not to say better at the moment. I think players and coaches will be able to attest to that once the tournament is over. But FIFA was well aware of the concerns and the complaints said by players last summer, and so are tackling new challenges this summer.
Just go back to the Inter Miami thing a little bit. I might be a little bit brutal here, and I'm sorry if this offends MLS. But
There's a shock.
Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, Sergio Busquets, Jordi Alba, they left Europe years ago now because they couldn't hack it anymore. They were basically, I mean, Leo Messi at PSG for the final 6 months was being booed by the PSG fans. He was gone. Could this be really embarrassing for Inter Miami and MLS in the sense that they could get quite heavily beaten by the teams they're playing? Obviously, I'm looking at their group. It's not the strongest group on paper, although Palmeiras are going to be a strong competitor. Porto, not the strongest European team. Al-Ahly from Egypt. But still, I just think that the level that US fans are seeing right now when Messi plays and he puts her in the top corner from a free kick and he looks fantastic, but this is going to be a different level altogether, isn't it?
Yeah. It's It's a difficult one. I think Inter Miami and Major League Soccer teams are built differently than most European teams in most European leagues because of the roster rules. So the salary cap and the designated player system makes for a very interesting setup. I think you have Lionel Messi, who is still able to produce great goals, Suarez, who's been assisting Messi, Sergio Busquets, who's doing great in the midfield. But then you have this lack of investment in the defense and the wingers because that's what Inter Miami are able to spend under the Major League Soccer roster rules. I think should Inter Miami struggle in this tournament, it will be because of defensive issues, as we've seen in Major League Soccer. I mean, I believe they got scored around 25 to 28 goals in a 7-game run. And that was due to their defensive issues. The team has no problem attacking and dominating offensively. Obviously, with the likes of Suarez and Messi, that would be the case. But it's this, what we call this like lopsided effect that the Major League Soccer rules really force these teams to suffer and not hold strong. I mean, GMs and sporting directors have to choose between a strong attack or a strong defense when spending. So I think that's where you see the consequences of those roster rules.
Are we expecting Inter Miami to be the best placed MLS side to do well in this tournament compared to, say, Seattle and LAFC? Out of the three of those, I mean, is it Inter Miami that are they expected to do the best out of those three teams?
Expected, yes. I think any team Lionel Messi plays in is expected to be the best because of his standard. I wouldn't underestimate LAFC's quality, though.
Thanks, Lizzie. Thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you out there. Time for a break now. When we come back, we'll head to South America, who are looking to take the tournament very seriously indeed. While the teams in Europe might be viewing the tournament as a distraction, the opposite is the case in the 6 teams coming from South America. In Brazil, the league is stopping for a month because of the tournament, and to discuss that and much more about the South American teams, we're joined by Tim Vickery, the South American football expert. How are you, Tim?
I'm very well. Looking forward to kicking this global ball. The ball is round, and so is the world. Kicking this ball around with you over the next few minutes.
Well, let's start then with that point about obviously the league stopping. I mean, why is it that they're taking this as seriously as they are?
Oh, if I put that question to anyone here and say that someone questioned it, they bite your head off. Let's remember that our Champions League, the Libertadores, it started in 1960 explicitly because Europe had a champion. You know, it was an explicit response. All right. You've got a champion there in Europe. We'll have a champion this side, and then we'll have a match to see who's the best in the world. Now, that's absolutely vital to the soul of South American football. So this kind of competition, it's an absolute dream come true for them. You know, the chance to prove themselves against those rich European cousins. So it's a tournament here with massive potential rewards, but also risks. Because the risk is playing against the sides from outside Europe, who Brazilians tend to look down their nose at. You know, and the Continental Cup that happens at the end of every year, you see that carrot and stick thing so clearly, because the dream is always to play the Europeans and beat the Europeans, and it hasn't happened for a long, long time. Last time it happened was Corinthians beating Chelsea in 2012. But the risk is losing the semi-final to a side from outside Europe. So this is a tournament which, for the South Americans, has tremendous possible rewards, both financially and, more important to them, I think, to the fans, in terms of prestige, proving the strength of South American club football. But there is the potential banana skin of losing to sides outside Europe.
Just to add to that, Tim, because I was in Doha. I think it was 2019 when Liverpool played Flamengo. I think, James, you might have been in Abu Dhabi in 2021 when Chelsea beat Palmeiras. Yeah. One thing that struck me both occasions was the absolute huge following that the Brazilian teams had, and I think fans in Europe won't kind of grasp how big it is to teams in South America, especially Brazil. It seems that the Brazilian teams, Flamengo particularly, have got this desire to prove that they are heavyweight football clubs.
Well, Argentine teams have sent supporters in mass numbers as well to these games, depending on fluctuations of the economy and the exchange rate. There'll be probably a little bit less support than there would have been were it not for political developments in the United States at the moment. But there will still be mass support. I think it's the South Americans and especially the Brazilians who are right up there at the top of people who've bought tickets for this Club World Cup.
Well, Tim, could you just talk us through, for the uninitiated, the 6 South American teams?
Well, if Brazil has really cut away from the pack in South America in recent years, and the last 6 finals of our Libertadores, our Champions League, have been won by Brazilians. 4 of them have been all Brazilian affairs. That's unprecedented dominance, and you're really seeing Brazil cut away from the pack. So we've got 4 teams from Brazil and 2 from Argentina. The 2 most serious contenders are Flamengo and Palmeiras. Very strong sides, very, very deep squads, very, very motivated squads. They're the ones to really watch, I think, with the possibility of going all the way in this tournament. Both have interesting coaches. Felipe Luis, a great hope of Brazilian coaches. We haven't had too many top-class Brazilian players turn to coaching. Great contrast this with Argentina. So Felipe Luis, former Chelsea, former Atletico Madrid left-back, he's got a very, very deep squad there at Flamengo. The Palmeiras coach is Portuguese, Abel Ferreira, and he really is one to watch. There's a lot of the young Mourinho about him, both in terms of his brilliance as a coach and maybe excesses of behaviour as well. And he can always find a plan. He's very, very, very impressive. So the strongest 2, I think, are Flamengo and Palmeiras. Botafogo are the reigning Brazilian and South American champions, but they've sold a few players. They're going to be selling more after the Club World Cup, and I don't think they're as strong as they were last year. Fluminense, I think, of the 4 Brazilians are probably the weakest. Although they have 1 or 2 interesting players, but I'd be surprised if they go really deep into the competition. For the Argentine sides, it's the big 2, River Plate and Boca Juniors. Boca are in a real mess. They've had a terrible time. Just bringing in a new coach, meet the new coach, same as the old coach. He's back for his 3rd spell. He's the coach who led them to their last Libertadores triumph, Miguel Angel Russo, back in 2007. So I think there's a fear that Boca might be humiliated. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they'll close ranks and make sure they're solid, but it's hard to see them going all the way. River Plate, very deep squad. Marcelo Gallardo, the coach, is extremely highly rated. His 2nd spell hasn't been anything like as glittering as his 1st spell so far. They have some interesting players, but I'll be interested to see if they can balance a desire to attack with the necessity to defend at the level at which they'll be competing over the next few weeks.
I think a lot of European fans in particular will be looking forward to watching some of the South American teams and trying to pick the next, South American gem who's going to move to Europe and be the next big thing. Is there any players in those teams who have qualified who you think may use this tournament as the stage to kind of really, bring themselves up into public consciousness?
Well, there's a couple there who are already moving to Europe straight afterwards. The big one is Estevão, who's going to Chelsea. Started, 18-year-old, just turned 18. Started for Brazil last night and didn't do badly at all. And he's an extraordinary talent. The best thing that's come out of Brazilian football since Neymar, I think. And another one who's moving to the Premier League straight after the tournament is the Botafogo centre forward, Igor Jesus. Who's a wonderful all-round centre forward, gives you so many things. It's a fantastic story, Igor Jesus, because he was in the Arab Emirates, a virtual unknown, not even a household name in his own home, I think. But Botafogo, whose scouting is very, very good, they picked him up when his contract was up, so they picked him up on a free. They unveiled him last July, and by September he's playing for Brazil at centre forward. He's not in the current Brazil squad, but Ancelotti saw him last week. One of the finest individual performances you could hope to see from a centre forward. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's going to get back in the Brazil squad. He's off to Nottingham Forest after the Club World Cup. So those are a couple of players who supporters are going to be very, very interested in. Another one who's hitting a lot of headlines, 17, turns 18 in August and made his Argentina debut last night. Franco Mastrantonio of River Plate, who is a very classy playmaker, left-footed. Reminds me a little bit. He's got a little bit of the languid class of a young left-footed Zinedine Zidane about him, which does make me feel fascinated about how he's going to get on in more compact football, because he does lose the ball a little bit. So those are giant talents, I think, all of them. And Mastrantonio is on everyone's shopping list at the moment, especially Real Madrid's. There are a few others. Boca, little holding midfielder called Milton Delgado, who's good at receiving under pressure, playing out from the back. So it's just simple little passes to keep it ticking over. So I think in the Boca side, he's certainly one to watch. The Flamengo right back, Wesley, in the national team squad. A little bit of an old-fashioned Brazilian attacking right back, bullet quick. Got some attacking talent. I think people will be interested in him. Which teams have we got left? I think we've only got Fluminense left. Fluminense, it's a player who surprises me that he's not in Europe already, and it may be because of his age, because he's already mid-20s. Little stocky Colombian midfielder, his first choice for Colombia, called John Arias, who can play as a winger, plays for Colombia more as a central midfielder. And if you saw that intercontinental final between Man City and Fluminense, he was the one who stood out. He carried the fight to Man City. Turns so well, stocky little figure, versatile. It's surprised me that, and I think it's come as a surprise to him as well, and a negative surprise that he hasn't been snapped up by Europe already. Maybe this will be a big chance for him to put himself in the window.
Rob and I were talking earlier, Tim, about I think the first iteration of this tournament was back in 2000 in Brazil, when Manchester United and Real Madrid played over in Brazil, and United played Vasco da Gama, and two greats of Brazilian football from basically gone back to Brazil, Romario and Edmundo, to help Vasco in that tournament. Now, I don't think there's as many superstar veterans that are playing, but there are one or two that are playing in South America this year. I think Cavani's the main one.
Yes, although he's been struggling, he's been having a hard time. Edison Cavani. I was there in the stadium for that one. And both and Romario would have been back in Brazilian football really for about 5 years. Then he'd had one or two little gallivants off, and Edmundo had a little spell with Fiorentina, which didn't end too well when he forced his contractual right to come home for Carnival when they had a striker crisis. And a key thing about that tournament was, and it was played in just intense summer heat. You know, United were coming straight out of the European winter, and especially in the first half before the pitch was in shadow, you know, they really struggled. But this obviously is an issue also for the Club World Cup and for the World Cup next year. And I remember the Copa America held in the States last year, and this time round, we've got some considerably earlier kickoff times than we had for the Copa America. But in one of the earlier games for the Copa America last year, before half-time, a linesman collapsed and had to be hospitalised because of the heat. He was from Guatemala. Now, that's in all of this talk about the Club World Cup, which I think is both on the one hand, I think it's a terrific thing. It's a wonderful thing to get all of the clubs the best clubs from different continents together. It's a wonderful thing. On the other hand, you do worry about the demands that are being made on players, and playing it in intense summer heat. I think there's a real risk here that we're gonna be burning out some of our stars.
Just finally, then, Tim, sort of $1 million question linked to that, really, because we all sort of think the heat will obviously favour the South American teams, given an advantage. Do you think one of the South American teams can actually go on and win this? I mean, where is their level compared to the best in Europe?
I think we're going to find out, and that's the fascinating thing. And I think that they have a number of advantages. The heat is one of them. Another is the level of motivation. It's going to mean much more to them than it will to most of the opposition. And another, and they're putting a lot of hope in this, that it's mid-season for them, and it's end of season. And You fellas will know this much better than I will. But you get the feeling from the European clubs that it's a bit of an inconvenience, and they're there for the money. They've been seduced, by the money, and how much of this is going to seep into the dressing room. So I think that the South Americans do have considerable advantages in this tournament in terms of conditions and in terms of the motivation and in terms of the moment that it's being played. But we are totally in unknown territory, and they could end up losing to sides like Esperance. It's the risk and the reward of this tournament from a South American perspective. But certainly at the start, at this moment, especially Flamengo and Palmeiras, they're going in it to win it.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, Tim. Really appreciate your insight. And when we come back, we'll be looking at the importance some of the teams in Europe are placing on the competition. Well, now to talk about the European teams. The bookmakers say that the winner should come from Europe. The 9 shortest priced teams are all from Europe. Real Madrid are the narrow favourites, ahead of PSG, followed by Man City, Bayern Munich and Chelsea. Our Madrid correspondent, Alex Kirkland, is joining us for a chat. Welcome along, Alex. Do Real Madrid view themselves as the favourites? What's the sort of perception of this tournament in Spain?
I think Real Madrid always view themselves as favourites for almost everything. Of course, the circumstances here are a little bit different. New coach in Xabi Alonso, half a new team, it looks like, or at least a substantial part of a new team. And that brings with it, I guess, a lot of challenges in terms of, the players adapting to what the new coach wants. Is it different style, different formation, different ideas, the new signings as well? None of that is going to be easy. And I know for a fact that Xabi Alonso doesn't view it as ideal either. I think his preference would have been to sort of come in after this tournament and sort of start with a little bit more lead-in time, rather than literally Real Madrid's players are back in training, a few days before they fly off to the US for this tournament. So not a lot of time for him to do what he wants to do. But despite that, like I say, I think almost regardless of circumstances, they view themselves as being either the favourites or among the favourites. In terms of the level of excitement in Spain around this tournament, I think that there's always a bit more interest here in this kind of thing, whether it was the old Intercontinental Cup or Club World Cup in the previous format. It's always been taken maybe a little bit more seriously here than it is in England. Part of that from a Real Madrid point of view is about their sort of image of themselves as being this kind of global, this universal club, and their fan base in other parts of the world, in Latin America and elsewhere. In terms of Atletico Madrid, they're delighted to be there, to be honest. Of course, there are 2 Spanish teams there, and the fact that it's not Real Madrid and Barcelona, the fact it's Real Madrid and Atletico, is a big deal for them. I think it means something to be one of those 2 La Liga representatives. So they're excited to be there, and they had a disappointing end to the season, much like Real Madrid did. So both of these teams have something to prove. But there's a lot for Real Madrid to kind of get sorted in terms of Xabi Alonso hitting the ground running, trying to sort of communicate his ideas and how he wants the team to play, and getting all that together in a matter of days before this kicks off.
Just to pick up on that, obviously Real have paid Liverpool 10 million euros to get Trent Alexander-Arnold in for this tournament. I mean, is that a statement of intent in terms of how seriously they are taking this competition?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the precise figure and how it's made up, I think maybe Madrid don't necessarily accept that 10 million figure, but of course that was what Liverpool said. I think it does. I think it tells you that they need this new project to get going right now, and they view Trent as being kind of a fundamental part of that. Of course, of the signings that we know about so far, he is the most high profile. He is the biggest name. He's probably the most exciting. Although Dean Howson's a very exciting signing, and Franco Mastantuono, who won't be there for the Club World Cup, he's a very exciting summer signing as well. But Trent is definitely the most high profile. So I think it says a lot about how seriously they take it. I think because he could easily have come in afterwards. He could have come in afterwards and come in for the La Liga season. The fact they weren't willing to accept that, and they're willing to however they kind of frame the exact figure, they were willing to pay it to get him in now. I think it says a lot. I think it's a pretty clear statement of where they view this tournament. Of course, it helps just how much money is available here, because yes, you're paying that money for Trent, but potentially if he helps improve the team and helps the team win the tournament, we know that the prize money is much, much greater.
Alex, just ask you on Real's priorities, because obviously we know that Bellingham's postponing his shoulder operation until, I think, is it after the tournament? So he's going to be out for 3 months. So basically they're happy to write off the start of the season to get Bellingham into the Club World Cup, which seems, I mean, we talk about the burnout situation, player welfare. Is Bellingham on side with that? Because obviously, I mean, if we start looking to next season, it's the World Cup at the end of the season. Does he see it as a possibility to have a break after the Club World Cup, going into the World Cup, or is it just a case of Real want their big stars at the tournament because they want to win it, and also they want their big stars there for the profile it brings?
Yeah, I mean, there's no ideal time, is there? There's no space. There's no space anywhere ever to really take the time that you need and be available for everything. So yeah, I guess it is about
most teams are having a time off. That's like now.
Yeah, it's about priorities, isn't it? It's about priorities and working out between the club and the player when they think is the best time to do it. Again, I think it says a lot about Madrid and how they see this tournament. I mean, this Bellingham thing, it's been going on forever. It was his first season that he had this dislocated shoulder. And they sort of got through the first season. They've got through the second season, although not as successfully because he hasn't been as good. He has often looked kind of tired and frustrated. He's always playing with this strapping on his shoulder, and he hasn't looked comfortable. And so it had to be done at some point. The only question was when. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I guess if maybe the season had gone a little bit differently, because they were just about hanging on in the league until really quite late. Maybe if they'd been out of the title race a little bit earlier, you could have tried to get it done, before the end of the league season. But then, yeah, you'd have missed this tournament. So clearly they want him there for this tournament, and they're happy to sacrifice, as you say, exactly how much time out. Let's see. But certainly he's going to be missing a good chunk of the start of the La Liga season, weeks and weeks. And I guess they think that's a price worth paying. And I think they can get through that time without him and get him back when it really starts to matter, and hope that his absence hasn't led them to drop points. But I mean, I have no doubt that process and that decision would have been taken in consultation with him for sure.
Alex, just on the money, I mean, we know the winner's getting 97 million quid, and there's a lot of, I mean, I know from a Chelsea point of view, that money is really important to them for PSR compliance and trying to go as far as they can in the competition. It's one of the reasons why I think they're going to take it particularly seriously. In terms of Madrid's finances, how important is it for them?
I think it's maybe more about prestige, but I don't think they can ignore that kind of money. There's sometimes an idea, a sort of preconceived idea that Madrid can sort of spend whatever they like, isn't there? But that's not really the case. And if you look at sort of the way that they've conducted themselves in the transfer market in recent years, you can see that's not the case, because what they've been doing quite often is looking to kind of be quite smart and bring in players on free transfers, albeit on high wages and big signing on fees like Mbappe and Rudiger and Alaba. But the fact that's generally been their transfer market strategy, with big exceptions, of course, the likes of Jude Bellingham, I think tells you that they haven't got unlimited resources to spend, and they have had some pretty major drains on their finances, namely the Bernabeu renovation, which still isn't completely finished. It's still ongoing. It's way over budget. And even though they've taken out sort of special loans to deal with that, and they try and treat that separately from the rest of the club's finances, it's still a drain on the club, even if over the medium term and certainly the long term is going to be a massive boost in terms of their revenue. So no, that they don't have unlimited funds. They can do with that prize money, but like I say, I think for them, at least as important, or maybe even more so, is what it would mean to the club to win this, and what it would sort of allow them to say about where the club is right now to win it.
I mean, I think the money involved has made it so every team has to take it seriously. Even the teams who haven't really got profit and sustainability worries, or financial fair play worries, that the level of money that you would receive for winning it means that you just have to take it seriously. I mean, to get a £100 million windfall for what is essentially what, 6 games,
money, isn't it?
It's Champions League money in the space of a couple of weeks. It's
you're going to be following City primarily, who might need it to pay a huge fine.
Well, or just spend it on loads more players.
Yeah, or lawyers.
I mean, I think they would have taken it seriously anyway. It's interesting that City, I think maybe a year ago, there probably was discussions at City about how we're going to treat this. The rhetoric over the last sort of couple of weeks has been very much that they're not considering this as the end of last season. They're considering it as the start of the new season. And maybe that's something to do with how badly last season went. They want to kind of forget what happened last season and draw a line in the sand. And this is a kind of a fresh start. One of the reasons why they're pushing so hard to get players in before the tournament, it's not necessarily because they want these players out of the tournament. It's because they're treating it essentially like, Pep wanting these players in before a pre-season trip. He wants the kind of the camaraderie and the team spirit to build as much as he wants to kind of get his patterns of play developed on the pitch. But the way City have treated it, even in terms of sending out club officials for site visits for training grounds, it's not something that's been done on the hop. Pep made a comment a couple of months ago about, I want my players to go and enjoy playing golf. I'm sure there's an element of truth in that, but it's very, very much focused on winning it.
I think there's a tension at City between the hierarchy who want to do well in this competition and want to represent City, because we know that Man City have got a lot of catching up to do still on the historic clubs, the Liverpool's, Man United, Barca's, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. They want to be there to kind of plant their flag. But Pep has made so many comments about this tournament which suggest that he's not that bothered. And the players, we know, Phil Foden was pretty clear, wasn't he, that he's exhausted mentally and physically after a tough season. He didn't want to go, but he's going, because Pep was asked the question, wasn't he? And he gave this answer, we are very concerned about Phil, want to make sure that he's fit. Will he take it at the Club World Cup? Yes. Well, give him some time off. So I think City could be really interesting to watch, in the sense that I don't get the feeling that their players or their squad are really kind of blown away by this tournament. And if you're looking for a surprise team that might actually not get out of the group, I think it could be Man City.
I think it'd be interesting to see, because of the way that City's group is structured. They play Juventus as their last game. Now, we're kind of expecting City to rotate for the first couple of games, and then when it gets to Juventus, maybe start picking his strong. And he did it in the last edition of this in Saudi Arabia. They played the Red Diamonds in the semi-final, and he rested a load of players. They won really comfortably, and then he brought all his starters back for the final against Fluminense, and obviously won that really comfortably. I wonder whether they're going to do something similar and rest a few players or rotate for the first two games. Once it gets to Juventus, essentially you could play Champions League teams all the way through to the final. I think if you throw a quarter-final against Real Madrid, for example, in front of Erling Haaland and Ruben Dias and Ederson, I think probably their motivation, their own kind of motivation, would take over in that instance, and they would want to win those games simply because they're competitors, and that's what they're here to do. I can't see them kind of easing off in games against really high-profile European teams at the end of this competition, which makes me think that they will do quite well if they get through the first sort of 2 or 3 weeks.
Alex, do you think, obviously there's going to be a degree of experimentation, I suppose, when Xabi Alonso is trying to bed in these new players. I know this is a difficult question to answer because you haven't got a lot to go on, but do you think they'll pick their strongest team straight away, or do you think they'll try and ease their way into it?
Well, yeah, like you say, there's so much that we don't know. There's so much we don't know in terms of exactly what kind of system he's going to want to employ, the shape of the team. I think it'll be a bit of a mixed bag, because you've got players who are going to have had very little rest. They've played, big name players, of course, are over in South America right now, for example, the international qualifiers, the likes of Vinicius Jr. So I think something similar is what I would expect in terms of being a bit of a mixture until they get to the knockout stages against the bigger teams. In Madrid's group, it's Al Hilal. We've got a new coach, of course, in Simone Inzaghi, Pachuca and Salzburg. And so those are 3 games that, in theory, Real Madrid should not have to field their strongest team, and they should be able to get through those 3 games and come out as winners. But like I say, there's so much that we don't know in terms of, if they get any more signings in before the Club World Cup, because we know about Howson and we know about Trent. They're working on Carreras, the left back from Benfica, expecting to get that done before the Club World Cup. So that's 3 defenders. You've got to build a whole new defense, as well as, like I say, whatever sort of tactical changes Alonso wants to bring
Alex,
in.
just looking at Athletic, because obviously they're in the competition because they're kind of record in Europe over the last 3 or 4 years. They're in a pretty tough group. They're in with PSG, Botafogo, who are the South American champions, and Seattle, who are the hometown team. Well, the home team in the sense that they're based in the US. Luis Enrique said after the Champions League final that they really want to win it. It's the cherry on the cake of their season. So PSG will obviously drive hard to win it. Do you think Atletico are in a decent shape to actually challenge to win it?
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to be at that game, the Atleti PSG game in LA. It's going to be very, very interesting. Of course, they're 2 teams that met earlier in the season. They played in the Champions League. Atletico somehow, inexplicably, got a narrow win in a game that they're absolutely battered by PSG and really, really outplayed and got a result anyway. I agree. It's going to be tough. Atletico had a very peculiar season in that they did pretty well right up until it really mattered, and then they fell apart. And towards the end, it felt like they were just kind of just seeing out time until the season got over and thinking about this tournament. Actually, I still think they've got a strong team and a strong squad. We know how good Julian Alvarez is. We saw Alexander Soroz towards the end of the season starting more games and scoring lots of goals, finishing the season in really strong form. So those 2, if you want sort of reasons to be optimistic about Atletico, it's probably the form that Julian and Soroz are in. Atletico looking to do business as well. This summer, they're working on deals right now. The likes of the midfielder Johnny Cardoso from Real Betis, among others. But I don't know. I tend to, generally, as you say, they're based on their sort of Champions League record in recent years, which has been solid, if not spectacular, and they tend to get through to the knockout stages and then go out, the Champions League, whether it's the last 16 or the quarterfinals. They haven't ever managed to get back to where they were a few years ago, where they were, making 2 finals in 3 years, for example. But I tend to sort of back Simeone in knockout competitions, in one-off games. I think the way that he tends to read the game and the in-game changes that he can make, and it tends to be pretty strong. Of course, they had that sort of sense of injustice about the way their season finished in the Champions League, being knocked out by Real Madrid on penalties, and that Julian 2-touch pen and all that. So I don't know. I think they're pretty strong, but like you say, they've also got a very tough group. So equally, it wouldn't surprise me, if they were to crash out in the group stage, for example.
James, you're going to follow Chelsea.
Yeah.
I mean, we've obviously spoke about City and Real Madrid. In terms of what Chelsea are looking to do, they're at a little bit of a different stage of their development under Maresca. How do you think they're viewing the tournament, and what are their aspirations, do you think?
Well, what's interesting about Chelsea is that when they appointed Enzo Maresca, they gave him a 5-year contract. And one of the reasons that they did that was that they didn't want any uncertainty around the managerial position going into this tournament, because they really see this as a really important tournament for the club. Obviously, they've got American owners. The profile over there is a real opportunity to grow the brand, as they would say. And really, Maresca, although he's delivered this season, he's obviously produced a trophy, the first trophy for Bowley and Clearlake. He's also got a top 4 finish, Champions League qualification. I think there are still a few question marks about Maresca, certainly around the style of play. They finished the season, they got that very important win at Forest, and then obviously they beat Betis in the final of the Conference League. And that really just put a very positive spin on what had been a really troubled sort of 2 or 3 months for Maresca, where he was starting to face sort of almost growing criticism from the terraces at Stamford Bridge, from the way they play out from the back, how ponderous it was, the chances they'd miss. And they've sort of, produced a really positive coda to that season that I think they'll now hope to build on. And obviously the big one for them is they've got Liam Delap in, beat Manchester United to sign him from Ipswich. And the question is, can he sort of add that potency in the final third that they've been lacking? They've dominated a lot of games in terms of possession. They've had sort of 75% of the ball in a lot of their games, but they've missed chances, particularly when they don't have Nicholas Jackson. They don't have anyone who can press as well as he can from the front. They've tried Pedro Neto through the middle. They've tried Turret George, the kid from the academy, through the middle. They've tried obviously Cole Palmer up there as well. Nobody's really got that kind of ability to play that centre forward role, which is what they're very much hoping Delap can do. And it's a big competition for him, because he's obviously got a lot to prove himself, because he's taken a big step up. He's had one good year in the Premier League. Obviously the level of scrutiny is going to be transformed for him. And it's an opportunity for him to hit the ground running. And I think there's also, from what I hear behind the scenes about Chelsea as well, that they are similar to City, sort of looking at this as well as, yes, this is a tournament for now, but it's also the start of next season, really, for them. So they're not going to, I think the plan is at the moment that they won't have a sort of pre-season tour after this. They're going to have, they're going to try and give the players 3 weeks off, if that's possible. And then they're going to condense their pre-season into a 2-week training block at Cobham. They won't go anywhere, I don't think. So in terms of, as you talked about, the camaraderie and team bonding and all that kind of thing, they're going to try and do that in the US.
Just on Maresca, though, this tournament specifically, that if Chelsea were to go out of the groups, for example, compared to making it to the last 4 or reach the final or win it, say, does the attitude from fans around him change when they all get back into Stamford Bridge at the start of next season, or will it just be written off as, oh, we never really cared anyway?
I think it's a free hit now for him because of how they finished the season. I think not only did he get them Champions League football when it looked like they were probably going to miss out, but he's secured one of their best second half performances, really, under him in that final in Betis to get the trophy. Yes, it's the Conference League. Yes, they were odds on to win it from sort of September, and everybody expected them to do so. But they, having played dreadfully in the first half, they then really sort of turned it on in the second half, and it, I think, has given Maresca a stability and a bit more authority actually as a manager, to sort of say, look, there are green shoots here. There are reasons for us to be optimistic about the way that we're playing. And actually, because we've been missing players through injury and obviously there's still, despite all the money they've spent, they're still looking to improve the squad. They still feel there's changes they need to be made there. He's only been there a year. He will argue that in the second season, he should be able to kick on. I think if it was an absolute disaster, They did go out in the group stage and they didn't win a game,
which it would be looking at their group.
Yeah, I mean they've got a very winnable group, and obviously they've only just found out they're playing Los Angeles because up until very recently it was going to be Club Leon, wasn't it? But they should. I think barring a catastrophe, this will be written off, and come August they'll be expected to kick on. They'll be expected to do better. But Maresca has, I think, bought himself some time with the last sort of 3 weeks of results.
Just 3 more European teams we should mention, really, with respect to Porto and Benfica and Dortmund. I think Inter obviously got to the Champions League final, didn't play particularly well, that got beat 5-0. They've just got a new coach, Christian Kivu. I'm not sure that they'll be competing looking at the age of their squad and how they performed in the final. But you've also got Bayern Munich. Harry Kane has got his first trophy. He'd love to win a World Club Cup, I guess, in the US. And PSG, who absolutely tore Inter apart in the final. Fantastic team, great players. I mean, I think PSG have got a real chance in this tournament.
I feel sorry for them.
It's going to be difficult, isn't it, for these teams, particularly those two who got to the final, to go again so soon.
That's why I feel really sorry for PSG, because historically, if you win the Champions League, your odds on to be crowned Club World Cup winners. It happened to City when they won. They went to Saudi Arabia and won at Cantor, and now PSG have come through an entire Champions League campaign. Obviously, they're a bit of a walk in the park in the final, but have now got to lift themselves to go again, to win a tournament. They're
quite a young team. I just think they've got they might have the energy to go again. I look at Inter, old and need a rest. I think the PSG squad might just think, let's take it on. Bayern again, maybe somewhere in between, because they've got quite an aging squad as well. But I think PSG was so good, not just against Inter, but against Arsenal, against Liverpool. They look a team that could take anybody on right now and win. I think PSG are probably the favourites.
I just think there's a lot of pressure on PSG now, because they're going to be considered to be a massive scalp heading into the tournament as reigning European champions.
Yeah, I think PSG have got quite a tough group. They've got Atletico and Botafogo, champions of South America, and Seattle, obviously being a team from MLS, will know the conditions. So I still think PSG will get out of it, but I just think PSG, for me, are the favourites because they've got such a young, vibrant, talented squad.
Well, it could go one or two ways, couldn't it? Either they turn up and they're just shattered already because of the energy they've exerted and they just bomb out the group, or they kind of ride that wave of momentum and go on and do quite well.
Alex, just to finish from you, how disappointed are Barcelona not to be in this competition?
Very, very. And talk about the money and the finances. For them, it really would be, even if they're in a slightly better position than they were a year ago, or certainly 2 or 3 years ago, it would mean a lot for them to be there financially. I mean, I guess you have to try and spin it as a benefit and say, okay, at least our players, having just had a really good season, a really demanding season, first season under Hansi Flick, where they've done a domestic double, went into the semis in the Champions League and did really well. You get a proper summer, and you get a bit of a break, and then you look to go again next year. So maybe you just try and spin the positives. But no, like I say, they, along with Real Madrid, are the two teams that would expect to anything like this. If there's Spanish representation, they would expect to be there, and they're not. So I think that's got to sting. But like I say, the fact they've had such a positive season, the mood there is really, really positive now. Couldn't really be much better in terms of how that sort of project is going under Flick after year one. I think that helps them to cope.
Do you think we've seen some kind of strange additions to this tournament in terms of qualification? Do you think in years to come that if a team's won its domestic title in Spain or England or in Italy, they might just find a way in, especially if they've got the world's best player in Lamine Yamal? It seems that a big, obvious hole in the tournament that these...
You can't know, can you? Because it's every 4 years.
I know, but so Chelsea in this tournament, having won the Champions League 4 years ago, there's one player that played in the final that's still at Chelsea.
Yeah.
That Reece James, it doesn't kind of reflect the actual here and now, does it? The here and now is that Liverpool are the champions of England, Barcelona the champions of Spain, Napoli the champions of Italy, and none of them are there. So how can it be the Club World Cup if 3 of the best teams in the world aren't there? And the best player in the world right now is definitely not there.
I just think it's what would happen, say, if Liverpool win the Premier League title on the final day of the season, and then in 3 weeks you're expected to have an entire trip to America.
No, I agree, but it's the tournament is a strange.
Well, it is, because I think lots of casual football fans are going to tune in and go, "Where are Barcelona?"
Yeah, where's Lamine Yamal?
Well, yeah, he's gonna be at home.
Having a rest.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Alex, for joining us. We'll see you out in the States. Safe travels, lads. Who have we not talked about? Who are you looking forward to seeing? Any particular teams that you might not on a weekly basis travelling around get to see that you're quite excited by?
I think Al Hilal are the ones to watch. I think that the Saudi Pro League genuinely think that they could challenge Europe's top 5 leagues with continued investment like we've seen. Al Hilal have got Ruben Neves, João Cancelo, Mitrovic. They're trying to get Osimhen. They've just hired Inzaghi, who is one of the most sought after coaches in Europe. they've got, I'm just looking at the group, they're in the same group as Real Madrid, but they've also got Red Bull Salzburg, who are, in theory, the weakest of the European sides who are there. Al Hilal would have every chance of getting through that group, and then it's knockout, and you just don't know. I think it would make a massive statement for Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabian football if Al Hilal were to get quite far into the tournament.
It was interesting. I just listened to Ivan Toney talk a couple of days ago about people, everyone's judging the Saudi Pro League when you haven't seen it. Come out and watch it. I suppose it is going to be a real test, actually, of that league, representing that league and that league standard.
And it shows. It's all very well Ivan Toney saying, "Oh, the standard's great," but none of us really watch it week after week. It is a test of the league to see how far they are away from actually competing. And I think when I went to Saudi Arabia with City in 2023, I think it was Al Ittihad possibly, who didn't get past the semis or the quarters, and there was quite a distance between Fluminense and City as the two top teams and everyone else. Now, the way that this tournament's structured would allow a team of lesser quality to get quite far if they have a good tournament. But if Al Hilal were to go out in the group stage, I think that would be quite, embarrassment is probably too strong a word, but massive disappointment for them, given the investment that they've had, and particularly if they've got Inzaghi in the dugout and Osimhen up front, they would expect to do quite well. I mean, I think the one thing with this tournament I would have liked to see is just a straight draw, so not seeded at all. I think that would have allowed other teams that perhaps we don't see regularly have a better chance of reaching the quarters and the semis, because you could have ended up with a group of Bayern, Real Madrid, Man City in the same group, and one of those would have to go home early. The way it's structured, I actually think that it's going to look like the last rounds of the Champions League, isn't it, essentially? I think, if it all goes to plan.
That's what the big clubs want, isn't it? They want to progress and earn more money. But I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing the Brazilian teams. I think that they're closing the league down for 4 weeks. So Flamengo, Botafogo in particular, they really want to win it. And I think it'd be great for the tournament if one of those won it, actually, that it would show that there's still this kind of, this pipeline of talent in South America that doesn't just get picked up by the European clubs at 16, 17, that they have got the ability to win it. I think the conditions will favour them. They'll have massive support. So I think the Brazilian teams will be worth watching. But I think one kind of outsider that I think, again, in Man City's group, Wydad, Casablanca, because we saw that Morocco at the World Cup had a run to the semi-finals and they shocked everybody, the quality of the team. They could be underestimated by Juventus or City. So I think Wydad could be a team that is worth watching.
It's worth noting, the first time that this tournament was organised in this kind of format, not the same format, in 2000 when Man United went after the treble. And the expectation was that Man United and Real Madrid would go and just blitz everyone, because Man United were the best team in Europe and Real Madrid were doing relatively well. And they got absolutely battered by the Brazilian teams. Yeah. And Vasco da Gama, I think, beat Man United really, really comfortably. There is the possibility of some of these teams, or the European teams, if they don't take it seriously and don't focus in the right way, getting quite a big shock from some of these teams, especially if you talk about the Brazilian league shutting down.
Yeah. The 11 games yet this season, so they're all fresh. They've not had a 60,
and that's
70
a massive
game season.
That's a massive thing, that.
Well, you convinced me. That's a non-European winner of the Club World Cup. You heard it here first. Well, thanks for tuning in. That's all for now, and we'll see you again soon.